The following is a presentation of the Eagles Sports Network.
Hi again, everybody, and welcome into episode 23 of Mossy Creek Conversations. It's great to have you with us for this episode, and it's a special one. It is a veteran in the media relations community, Eric Trainer. He spent 6 years at Carson-Newman as a media relations and marketing director for the Eagles, and for the last 25 plus years, he has been with the University of Tennessee. Eric, thanks so much for taking some time. Looking forward to going down memory lane here with you.
It's great to join you, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start with this question. When you stepped onto the campus of Arkansas as an undergrad, what was the dream job?
At that point, I didn't know. I transferred there to major in journalism. So at the time, I was sort of thinking sports writer. But while I was there, I also got a little taste of working in the media relations office and enjoyed both aspects, and eventually made a decision to go into media relations after doing an internship following my senior year.
You had some student roles with Arkansas, I think mostly working with the women's basketball team there. What were some of the roles that you had there at the very start of your foray here into the media relations world?
Yeah, so just getting my start, it was basically do anything they asked me to do, which would be handing out stats, and then they kind of try you and see what you can do, what you're capable of, where they can trust you. And so I started writing feature stories because I was also working at the student newspaper at the time. So they felt like that would be a good opportunity for me to help do feature stories on the basketball players. So that's kind of where I started doing a lot more. And then keeping stats at games, working with the media. And then one of the biggest opportunities I got there, which was a big shock for me, but our SID's wife was expecting, and she had to go to the hospital. So he had to go be with her. And this person who was his secondary wasn't able to travel. So they said, "Hey, Eric, would you go to Baylor with the basketball team tomorrow night?" And I'm like, wow, yeah, that would be great. And so that's sort of when, I really got the bug to be in this business, just traveling with the team and being a part of that. And I look back and I think, gosh, they really trusted me to do that. Just a student who hadn't been there with them that long. And at the time, you don't think about it. You just think, wow, this is cool. But I really am grateful for Steve Wright trusting me to do that, to go on that trip.
Do you remember anything about that game?
I do. What I remember the most, it was Baylor had I remember the surroundings of it, the Heart of Texas Coliseum. And I remember the dressing rooms were these portable trailers on the end of the facility. It was a rodeo arena is what it seemed like. And the team had to go into these little portable trailers for a locker room. That's what I remember most. I also remember in those days, we didn't have email or internet, and fax machines really weren't, at that time, they weren't used a lot. So basically everything you did was dictate over a phone. So I can remember calling newspaper reporters in the various cities, Fayetteville, Little Rock, Tulsa, and dictating the box score. And then I called a lady named Nan Elrod, who worked at the Southwest Conference, and gave her the statistics from the game and answered her questions. And that was kind of my conference update report. And lo and behold, when I came to UT as a GA a year later, she was part of the stat crew here. She had moved to Knoxville. So it was kind of weird how worlds kind of come together.
Yeah, it's a small world, and let's get into that opportunity that you have at Tennessee. Why did you choose to pursue a master's at the University of Tennessee of all the places that potentially could have gone?
Well, I guess like a lot of people in the media relations or sports information field, I attended the COSIDA convention, and that would have been, I guess, back in 1989. In Kansas City. I think it was 89. It might have been 88, but it was in Kansas City, and I interviewed you. You basically put your resume in, and then they have a job seekers panel there. And the people who are looking to hire someone, they come to this board and look at all these resumes, and then they schedule interviews with prospective candidates. And I did several interviews at the time, and and then ended up talking with Debbie Jennings, who was the director of media relations for Tennessee, and had a great conversation with her. And I had some other schools I was visiting with as well. And I got an offer, and just basically everything she told me about Tennessee and Knoxville just really sold me on being a part of the program. And then the excitement of course, the women's basketball program and Coach Summitt was a real draw for me.
You mentioned the fact that once you got some of that first experience at Arkansas, that kind of elevated the fact that potentially this was something that you really wanted to do. How did Tennessee form you, shape you into a person that not just wanted to step away from potentially the newspaper aspect or sports writer aspect into that I want to work at a college, I want to be in media relations with an actual university?
Well, I think the internship I mentioned earlier at a newspaper gave me experience of what it would be like on a daily basis to be there. And then coming to Tennessee as a graduate assistant really immersed me in the world of collegiate athletics. I mean, I had always been a fan of sports growing up, but just being a part of the organization, the level of excellence, the expectations on an everyday basis, and then being a part of a team. Something as an athlete, I really enjoyed that growing up, being part of whatever team it was and group. That was really appealing to me, and being a part of that organization and helping that unit in my role. And then just the way things were conducted there. I mean, there were really high expectations of everyone. That excellence was the standard. You just wanted to do your very best every single day.
So then in the fall of 1991, an opportunity at Carson-Newman University opens itself to you. How did that come about, and what was the application process like to come over to Mossy Creek and start your career as a full-time member?
Well, at that point, I had finished. I worked 2 years as a graduate assistant at Tennessee, and then another year they asked me to come back and be an intern because we were hosting multiple SEC championships and NCAA events here. So I went through that job application process again, applied for lots of different jobs, and little did I know that someone I had worked with in the media here in Knoxville would give me a phone call and gauge my interest in coming to Mossy Creek. And Stan Cotton was that person, and someone I really respected working with in the media, just someone of high integrity. And he asked if I'd be interested in coming up there and talking to him about the position. And at that point, I didn't dream I would get that position, because that was for a director's position. A lot of times you go straight into an assistant position after you've been a graduate assistant or an intern. So I was excited about it, but I had not run a football press box before. I hadn't handled wrestling before. And so there were a lot of things with it that I'm like, I need to look into this. This is exciting for me. I know about Carson-Newman football and baseball and basketball and volleyball, a lot of different sports, because the Knoxville media covered that. But am I ready for this job? So I did go up for an interview and talked with Stan and David Barger and several of the coaches, and I think Coach Sparks as well. And just they were kind of gauging my interest and my level of knowledge and whether I would be able to fit into that role. And then I ended up getting an opportunity. They offered me the job, and I said yes. And I was sold. Just the people part of it was huge for me, and just being a part of an organization. Again, I think you could see there was a push to be the very best, and also the people aspect. I mean, and I had that at Tennessee too with the people I worked with here. It was very much a family, tight-knit unit, and I could sense that there.
What were some of your early roles here?
Well, right out of the gate, it was strictly media relations. So basically, Stan Cotton was my office mate at the time. We shared an office that at the time was a former closet, as he called it, there at the field house. And Steve Cotton was still around a little bit. He was getting ready to transition and he had held that position, and he was getting ready to take a radio position at Marshall. And he was kind enough to kind of show me where everything was, the files, and how things worked. And both of those guys were just terrific at giving me sort of a blueprint of how things had worked. And, I really appreciated that. Steve's kindness before he left was super helpful, and getting to meet the students who had worked for him. And I knew right away that those students were going to be very important to what we were going to be able to accomplish that coming year, because they had done all of this before. And one of the things I've always tried to do is to listen to people around me. And I don't care how new you are to something, people, or how much you even know, people can help you if you'll listen to them. They'll give you a little nuggets, then help you get through things. And then Stan was terrific too. He was so supportive, and working together with him, he handled all the radio and television aspects of it. And he pretty much said, "Hey, this is your baby. You roll with it. If you need anything, let me know." So I just kind of went from there. And I think the first thing that hit me right at first was the football season was coming up, and I had not run a football press box before. I had not gone on the road and statted a game before or anything. So I used the knowledge I had here from working with women's basketball, which is pretty huge, and the media contingent was similar as well, and that enabled me to kind of get through that first season and feel my way through it.
Yeah, I mean, getting that transition right out of the gates must have been difficult, but you had two great people there to learn from in Stan and Steve Cotton, and it's interesting now looking back on it. Stan is now at Wake Forest. Steve is at Marshall. You're at Tennessee. How would you describe what a person maybe like David Barger and the university as a whole gave to young people like the three of you, and you in particular, to make that opportunity in the job that you were in something that was truly the best that would push you to the next level?
I think the opportunity to be a part of and to play a role in the organization. There was a lot of trust put in us to do our jobs, and a lot of support. And we were never alone in that either. Like when you come in, you feel you have people supporting you. And there was a lot of the times I remember too would be traveling on the road. It wouldn't just be me with the team. It would maybe David, Stan, and I and others would travel on the road together. So it was more than just about sports. It was about building relationships and trust. And that was something that as I look back on it, and I knew it at the time, is just a special place because of the people. And it's not just there. It goes to the coaches, to the people in the university as well. And just being a part of a family type situation was really cool. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. So to have that and to be around that and that support and that love and people being there for each other was phenomenal. And then too, I think Carson-Newman always tried to excel and put itself in a position to get out into the world, so to speak, in athletics. Didn't back down from playing larger schools. So it had that big time feel to it because of the mentality. We might be in a small town, and at the time they were NAIA and then transitioning to NCAA Division II, but it wasn't that mentality that we operated by. It was, we're doing this to be the best we can possibly be. And I think too, we had a great visibility in college athletics because of some technology that was out there, because of some relationships that our department had, coaches had with some television folks, and able to get us some visibility that other schools that size couldn't have.
So I promise you that I wasn't going to get into too many specifics, but I do have one thing that I'd like to hear a backstory of. I brought the prop with me. It's the 1993 baseball media guide, and I assume that you were the one that either took this picture or certainly put this package together. It is the Carson-Newman baseball team dressed as, there's five of them dressed as Batman.
Yes.
And they were called the Batmen because the year before they had a group that that crushed the ball, hit 332 and hit 79 home runs that I think were program records at the time. Do you remember a backstory in terms of how that picture became the front of the media guide?
Yeah, I'll have to go back to my Tennessee days. One of the things that I mentioned, Debbie Jennings earlier, she was my supervisor and mentor at Tennessee, and she used themes for media guides for all of our sports. When I came to Tennessee, that was just part of it. That every year there had to be a creative theme for every team, and I think she felt like that was a way to get people talking about that program. So I went to Carson-Newman, and I kind of took that with me. I wasn't sure how people would take that, and I always felt like it's up to the coach. If the coach doesn't want to have a theme, I'm not going to push a theme on the coach. But if they want one, I'll help them with it. And I went to Coach Rundle's with that idea, and some of the players, just to see if they would be willing to do that. And they kind of laughed and chuckled a little bit, but then they were pretty willing to do that, as I recall. And they may say they weren't, but and I believe Rick Hester took that photo, if I'm not mistaken. But I think the movie Batman Returns had come out in theaters. I don't know if it was that year or the year before, but it struck me, these guys are all coming back. It's going to be a great baseball team, and a lot of great personalities on that team. And they embraced it, and what a year. That's one of my greatest memories, that group of guys. And it just gives me chills thinking about them. They still include me in a lot of events they have, or if something happens to someone in the group, I'll get a text. And so just a really tight group of guys, and so much fun. I think that was the year they went to the NAIA World Series in Des Moines, and just one of the moments in my time in athletics that I think about with a lot of fondness.
What was so special about that team? Can you remember?
They were brothers. They were a brotherhood of guys that they had a belief. Nothing was too big for them, and no moment was too big. They just came up with clutch plays. They were great hitters, but they just went out there with a lot of confidence, and they had fun. They had fun playing the game. And I think back to Coach Rundles and Joey Seaver and Marty McDowell and Sean McDowell. Excuse me, we call him Marty McFly. Sean McDowell, and those guys were just a lot of fun. And it was, I hate to overuse family, but they were so tight, and those guys still are. They still are.
So after that season, I think becomes the start of the transition, as you had mentioned earlier, from NAIA to NCAA Division II. What was that experience like for you, and how did maybe some parts of your job and your role have to adapt to a different level?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I think was a transition period, it was a year or maybe a little bit longer. I'm trying to remember what that was, but basically you had two organizations you had to supply with information or statistics, and so it duplicated a lot of the work that we had to do as media relations people. So that was kind of, to me, the biggest thing, and I'm sure administratively there were a lot more paperwork that had to be done as well. But just being part of the South Atlantic Conference, I think that was, to me, that kept it pretty consistent, because it was, the whole league was transitioning over at the time as well, if I'm not mistaken. And so that made it very helpful. And then, that group of guys I worked with in the conference were terrific too. So we all kind of went through that together.
So the only other, let's say, moment or specific memory that maybe I'll ask you about is, I think it was your final year, 1996 football. Goes all the way to the national championship game. What do you remember about that season and how that year came to be for that group?
Yeah, that was the Eagles getting over a lot of hurdles that year. We, as I recall, a lot of trips to Florence, Alabama, to play North Alabama in the first round. I think maybe three in a row when we got to NCAA Division II, and usually they would go on to win the national championship, and we'd play them in the first round and fight them, but just not be able to get by them. And in '96, we finally were able to not play North Alabama in the first round. And it was such a relief. I think we got West Georgia maybe that year, and we're able to handle them. And then the next week, I believe it was Valdosta State we played. And again, if it's been a long time, but I believe that was Hal Mummy's last game at Valdosta State before he went to Kentucky to be the head coach at Kentucky. And I just remember that game just being a zoo because all the Lexington, Louisville media folks came to Jefferson City. They wanted to cover that game because he was going to be the next coach at Kentucky. It was already out there. So we had to contend with a whole lot of media, and they wanted to be in the press box. And I just, a lot of times you gauge who gets to be in the press box by the size of the media outlet, their circulation and those sorts of things. But I was pretty adamant that people who were going to be in that press box were the people who covered the team, either Valdosta State or Carson-Newman all year long. So that's what we did. I know there were some columnists from Lexington and Louisville probably weren't happy with me, but I just felt like that was the right thing to do for the media who covered Division II football. So Carson-Newman wins that game. The next week, I believe it was UC Davis we played, and they came to Berktar Stadium. And wow, I think that was a game where it rained a lot that week. And there have been multiple stories from my recollections of Carson-Newman where there had to be a helicopter brought in to either dry the field, and that was a situation I believe they brought in a helicopter to dry the fields before they had the artificial turf like they do now. And that field though was just a little moist, and Carson-Newman battled that game, and UC Davis went ahead late in the game, and Carson-Newman tried to score, had to punt it, and they held UC Davis. And UC Davis punted the ball, and I remember this. The guy let loose this huge punt, and it landed. It was inside the Carson-Newman 5, and the ball just went splat. It just hit and died right there at the 2-yard line. I'm thinking, oh my goodness! And I say 2. It was inside the 5, but I think it was the 2, and it just went splat. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we've got to go 98 yards to win this game and go to the championship game. And I recall this to this day. The radio announcers were in the press box where you could hear exactly what they're saying. And UC Davis's radio guys said, well, with that punt, the gods of California are smiling upon the Aggies. And everybody just turned and looked like the gods of California. And at that moment, I'm just thinking, okay, we'll see. And the Eagles marched the entire length of the field. And I think it was Zach Allen either hit Jaquez Rumpf or Jarvani Jackson in the end zone for a touchdown. And all of us were just grinning from ear to ear, not cheering in the press box, but just, how about that? And then they go to the championship game, and it came up just short in that. And then they were back there again, and that was my last year being involved with it. But just for them to get to that point after what they've been through, climbing their way up in Division II, it was a big moment.
Your memory's pretty good for all of that knowledge. I can't remember what happened in the game last week that I was at, and here you are pulling it out from 25 years ago. That's awesome.
Don't quote me on the exact details there, but I remember the big parts of that.
That's awesome. Well, you did have an opportunity to spend a lot of time with Coach Ken Sparks. What do you remember most about your time being in and around his football program?
Well, I think the biggest thing about Coach Sparks is he is recognized for his success on the field. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves about how successful his teams were, but for him, it was always apparent that it was more than just a game. And he would say, it's not about the score on the scoreboard. And it was a calling for him. That was his pulpit. He used that as a way to lead young men, to try to teach them the way that would help them be successful in life and be good men in the community. And that's something that struck me about him. And having worked close to Coach Summitt here, and then when I came back a little bit with her as well, same situation, excellent coaches, but it was more than just about the game. There was something more to be learned there, and they made sure of that. And then both to the standard by which they coached. I mean, they expected a lot of their players, and they encouraged them and put people around them who would help them achieve.
So you spend 6 seasons at Carson-Newman. We'll hop into your Tennessee career here in just a moment. But when you look back at your time at Carson-Newman, what sticks out to you about how much that opportunity allowed you to develop into the person that you are now?
I think from the character standpoint, the support of being around just great people, I think that was the number one thing, learning, being reinforced about how important integrity is, being able to help student athletes go through what they go through away from competition, just helping them, support them as people. That is always something that to me, part of why I'm in this business. It's not just about going to games and getting to travel to cool places. That's all fun, but it's really being a part of people's lives and being a part of the energy on a campus with young people. Also, just how big it is, how big the people aspect of it is in terms of the people you work with, and how those connections help you. You can't do anything alone. You have to have people around you who trust you, who support you, and help you through your difficult times too, because nobody can do this job by themselves.
So you get the opportunity to head back to Tennessee. I think your initial roles there were track and cross country. What went into that decision to head back to Knoxville to undertake those programs and be a part of the Vols?
Well, I wasn't expecting that opportunity to arise, but just the challenge of being back there. And I think also too, I was married. My wife, Laura, was working there at Carson-Newman too. She was an admissions counselor there, and we really enjoyed being there. We were involved with our church there, and she was part of my stat crew too. She would work in the press box. So it wasn't just me. It was our family. But I started thinking, I'm working with all those sports, and I'd also taken on marketing, which I was excited to be part of that and learn about that as well. But I felt I was sort of getting away from the media relations part that I really loved. And then also thought a little bit about being in a small shop where you don't have a lot of people around or to help with the sports. And there's a lot to it. And I know you have a lot more now too with social media and the web and and television and radio and everything. So we were thinking about having children, and I was just trying to figure out how I was going to be a part of my children's lives. And for me, I was trying to think, well, gosh, I don't know if I can do this forever. I love it, but maybe that would give me a better opportunity if I had just a couple, 2 or 3, 4 sports to work on, focus on rather than 15. So for me, it became kind of a personal family type thing to think about that. Not really wanting to leave because it was a great place and it was so comfortable and still challenging and fun to be a part of. But having been at UT, I kind of knew what I was getting into as well. So wasn't like I was looking to go just someplace totally different to move up the ladder.
So your first year back, is this accurate? That was Peyton Manning's last year at Tennessee?
That would have been
or is that the year
97,
before?
98. So that would have been the year they won the national championship with T. Yeah.
Okay, so then with that in mind, what was it like? I know that wasn't necessarily your main role, but I know that at that level you do help out. You have a hand in a little bit of everything. What was that year like, going from this level where, in essence, the year before you had gone to a national championship game with Carson-Newman, to now going to Tennessee, to where that team is right there in the top 5 in the country and eventually pulls down the hardware?
Yeah, it was didn't plan it, but I walked into a situation where the football team obviously went undefeated, and then women's basketball did the same that season with Holtzclaw, Catchings, Randall and company. So I walked into a really exciting time at Tennessee. And then one of the first things I did too when I worked there was they had the women's team before had been part of an HBO documentary covering their season. So they had this big celebration and debuted the video of that Cinderella season video at the Tennessee Theater. So those were some of the things that I kind of stepped into when I went back there, and was kind of cool to be part of all of that. But I will tell you too, though, I still had a foot in Jefferson City. I came back to some games and still kept tabs and watched on TV. That just doesn't go away. So that was cool too, to be close enough where I could still pay attention closely to that.
So one question that I think about from time to time, being in my role, and I'm curious your take on it. When you see a player, you mentioned Holtzclaw, you've seen a bunch of future NFL stars there, and Candace Parker sticks out in my mind. You know that they're really talented. You know that they're a great athlete, but can you ever imagine, while you're watching them throughout their college career, that they become the kind of person and the player that they eventually become?
Players are different. People are different. Sometimes you can recognize that in someone when they walk on campus. They have an air about them. They have a confidence. Some people say swagger, that sort of thing. But I think ultimately, when you find out what they do in critical moments under pressure, how do they respond? And that's where you kind of see what people are made of. And it doesn't even have to be on an athletic field. It could be people you work with. It could be in a hospital, a doctor, a nurse, people who find a way to step up when times are tough and get the job done. And, I think back to people overcoming injuries to playing games. Candace had a shoulder that kept popping out, and she would go back in the training room and get it popped back in and come back out and play. And I think it was a torn labrum, if I'm not mistaken. And that's painful. So you see that toughness and the tenacity they have to compete. And a lot of times people grow into that, but sometimes people maybe are just, I don't know if they're born with it, but they develop that along the way.
So with your time, we mentioned the football national championship aspect of it, but I believe one of the first times that you really get to experience it in more of that full-time role would have been the 07-08 women's basketball national championship season. What do you remember about that group that eventually won the national title? One of the, I guess that is the last one that the women's basketball program, or the most recent one that the women's basketball program has won.
Yeah, that group, it seemed like it's hard to believe because they won it all, but I don't think that was a given for that team. Even though they'd won it the year before, there were a lot of people, for whatever reason, doubted that they could do it again. And I think that team played at times with a chip on its shoulder, trying to prove that. I think what won it for them was the rebounding and defensive aspects of the game. They didn't always score a lot of points. The 98 team just scored points in chunks. I mean, they walked out there and they scored 90 or 100. So the 08 team had to work a little bit more for it. But defensively and from a rebounding standpoint is how they won their title. And I think the semifinal game, they won on a rebound bucket on a missed shot against LSU to go to the championship game. So that was just another example there where they, it wasn't coming easy for them, but they did the dirty work, the little hard things that nobody recognizes a lot of times, and were able to get the championship game. And then they took care of Stanford pretty easily.
I want to peel the curtain back a little bit, because I think a lot of people might think, hey, in your role, oh, you were right there. You get to cut down the nets. You get to have fun. You get to, celebrate. But having been in situations like that in the past, you're trying to coordinate with interviews and trying to make sure that people get what they need to get done, and, trying to make sure that there is everything from a job perspective that you're taking care of. What did you have to do after the final buzzer sounded, after that national championship was won, that maybe people that aren't in this industry or never get to experience it, what were you doing when that happened that some people might not understand what that role is?
Yeah, before that, I missed a lot of the second half. I was in the locker room the second half because one of our players, Vicky Baugh, was injured. Ended up being a knee injury, and my boss wanted me to go back and stay back there and then help provide information. The sideline reporters like to do injury reports, and so I came back out and told my boss what was going on back there, what the doctor said, and then she would, communicate with the sideline reporter. So being in the locker room, that was weird, not being out there for an exciting game. And I was finally able to come back before the game ended and watch the rest of the game. But yeah, after a game, it can be a little chaotic because a lot of times TV crews will want an interview right after the game. So you try to help track down a player or coach for that. Then you're also dealing with radio networks. There's an NCAA network that wants somebody to talk to after the game, and then you have your own network, radio network that you're trying to help. And then for a game like that, there's usually like a Sports Center hit that you've got to get somebody on, and sometimes that's right away, and sometimes that's maybe 5 or 10 minutes after the game. So you're trying to help corral players who are excited. So you try to let them enjoy that, because who knows if you ever get that opportunity again. But then kind of pull them aside and say, hey, we need you to do this interview with ESPN or whatever. And so, we're not out there jumping up and down and celebrating. We're happy for our players, but you have to retain your composure and be professional and get people where they need to be to helping other people do their jobs.
So your first year as the full-time media relations director for women's basketball was the year after Pat Summitt retired in the first year of Holly Warlick. But you mentioned Pat earlier and the similarities between her and Coach Ken Sparks. You spent a lot of time around that program with Pat Summitt. What do you remember most about who she was as a person and what she stood for from the leadership standpoint of that program?
Yeah, just a great role model for not only women, but for anyone really who wants to look at someone with integrity, hard work, perseverance. People, a lot of times will ask me, was she difficult to work for or work with or be around? Because they see some of her sideline, getting on a player or getting after the officials or anything like that. And that's just a part. And the same thing with football coaches. There are moments when they have to get on people and yell at them, and that's not who they are all the time. So that's to me the biggest thing about her is that's just that moment, Pat. There's the Pat that's very reassuring to her players, or very supportive, or she'll ask you how your day's going. She'll laugh. She's got a sense of humor. She had a sense of humor that people didn't really know about. And those are the kind of things that you find out when you work around folks like that they're just like the rest of us. They have a really big platform that they have to be on, and a lot of expectations on them. And I think she handled that so well. And I think a lot of it was from her upbringing, just a really blue collar family, worked really hard, high standards for everybody. They were on a farm, and to make things work, you really had to take care of your business on a daily basis. You couldn't let anything fall between the cracks, and that was kind of the way she coached and led people. People are counting on you, and you don't want to let them down. And I think to me, that's the way I felt around her and Coach Sparks, really, and a lot of the coaches I've had the pleasure to work with. You're never afraid of anybody. You just don't want to let them down. You want to do your very best for them and make sure they have what they need to do their job.
The Pat Summitt legacy continues to live on because Holly Warlick, who was one of her former players and assistants, coached there, and now it's Kelly Harper, the former Kelly Jolly, is there as well. How do you see her legacy continue all these years later?
Yeah, Pat's legacy lives on through all the players she coached, and they all were impacted by her. I'm sure a lot of these guys that played for Coach Sparks are the same exact way. I mean, the impact is there, not just while they're in college, but it goes beyond that, and they pass that on to other people. And that's what's so powerful about people of impact like that. And you see that with Holly. Holly played for her, was a point guard for her, and Kelly was too. So they know the expectation of the program. That's the hard part you step into. There's a lot of pressure to follow a legend as a coach, or whatever job it is you take. You follow somebody who's excellent at what they did and just revered. There's a lot of pressure that comes with it. But I think both Holly and Kelly have handled that with so much grace and understanding for what is required of that job. And each have done it their own way. But you also see the model that they use, the expectations, a lot of the backbone of the program comes from their mentor and coach and friend.
How would you describe the job duties of a Division I media relations director in 2021?
Well, it can be different from school to school. We here at Tennessee have become a little bit more. We've split up responsibilities a little bit more, I would say. Social media and graphic design have become a couple of big time elements in Division I athletics. And for a time, I was doing all the media relations stuff, but doing some graphic design, doing some video work, a lot of things that probably I would be doing at a D2 school or a mid-major. I was doing all those things. And now it's become a little more segmented, where you have a social media team and a graphics team, and we have a photography staff. So in that aspect, it's gotten a little bit easier in terms of not having to do so many different things. But I spend a lot of time with those things because social media ultimately comes back to our office in terms of what's out there. And we have to help be proactive with that, with the messaging, reactive to things that are out there, be totally aware of that. And also, I think, too, the cool part for me, and I think it would be too, at a place like Carson-Newman, is you can get your message out a lot easier now with those entities. And if you have video and social media teams that are really good, you can do a lot of stuff that if the media is not covering you like you would want, then you can reach the fans, you can reach recruits, you can get it to the media, and then maybe the media does a story because of the work you've done. And that's really cool. I think that you can have a little more control of getting the message out there.
I think you mentioned early on in this conversation that when you were at Arkansas, you used to have to phone in box scores. Well, now it updates in real time pretty much, and people can look at the live stats in real time. When you think about how much the industry and how much your job has changed in the last 30 plus years, what do you think is something that potentially you wish you had learned maybe a little bit earlier that would help you during this time period with the amount of different areas that now you have to deal with through media and video and graphics and all of those aspects?
Yeah, probably. I want to say for me, probably graphic design. I like doing creative things, but the job I do does not allow me enough time to do a lot of the graphic parts of it. And fortunately, we have some people who are just terrific, and that's their passion. I was able to do enough of that in the early days of social media to get graphics out and do things, but I'd like to be better at that. But I also feel like I've changed with the times. I've had to learn a lot of things. We've had different leadership here in our office and in the administration, so I've had to adapt. And I think that's adaptability to me has been the key, because if you just say, "Well, I don't know how to do that," you're not going to last very long. So I've had to learn, unlearn, and relearn a lot of things through the years, and it may change within 2 years where you're doing all of your video. I think there was a time where we were producing a little basketball show on a weekly basis. I had a graduate assistant who had a lot of experience in being in front of the camera and operating a camera. So we were able to put together a little show each week and then put it on social media. So that was fun, kind of doing things like that. But But again, you sort of feel like you're not doing what your specialty area is. And I really like the daily, the ability to work with the coaching staff and our players, and to work with the media and get messages and information out to them that can help publicize our program.
For somebody that wants to be in a position like yours someday, what advice would you give them?
Start now. I think it's the social media aspect and the video aspect seems to be something that comes as people grow up. With phones have really changed things. A lot of people are able to do that, but I think being able to write, to me, is critical to this job, because there's so much of it that involves writing, and then it can include social media as well. I just hate to see messages on social media that are just littered with grammar errors, and sometimes it's for fun and people are kind of casual with it. But when somebody puts out a message and you're like, wow. But I think the writing, and then get involved, whatever level. If it's in high school, if you can get involved writing for a school paper, a yearbook, those sorts of things, start early. I didn't realize until my third year of college that I might want to go into something involving writing. I was a business major when I started out, and I was too shy, I guess, at the time. I didn't want to put something out there for somebody to read, even though I love sports and I didn't really know about writing. I had a command of sports, and then just taking the classes that helped me be able to convey that in an organized way. That was critical. So I think writing, getting experience early, volunteering wherever you can. And as I recall, my first thing I ever did involving sports information media relations was getting cut from the high school basketball team as a sophomore. I was just crushed. And the coach knew it. He knew how much I love sports. And he said, well, we've got a job here to keep stats for the team. We need kind of someone to do that. Would you be willing to do that? And I was thinking, yeah, I get to go to all the games. I'd probably go to them anyway. So he let me keep stats. And I had one of those 4-color pens with the red, I can't remember, red, yellow, red, blue, black, green. Anyway, I used one of those to keep stats by quarter. And it's kind of funny, when I do hand stats here at a scrimmage or something, I use the same kind of pen now. And little did I know that was the beginning of media relations. And I will say too that motivated me getting cut. I played on the team the next 2 years and started as a senior. So that I wasn't ready for media relations quite yet at that point. I still had some sports to play.
I think that a lot of us in this industry are a little bit similar in that our athletic careers come to an end and we don't know what else to do. So we end up pursuing something like this. Couple more questions, then we'll let you get out of here. You've been in this industry for almost 33 years, and this is probably a question that's going to be very difficult to answer. But could you pinpoint 1, 2, maybe 3 moments during the last 3+ decades that really stand out to you, that were gratifying, that you felt like you really made the right career choice to go into this field?
I would. It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint. It really is. It really is. I think being at Carson-Newman, to me, is one of them, and because there are multiple times I can think of, but just my 6 years there, I think those had so much impact on me as a person, as a professional. I learned so much there. I mean, you basically, and I tell everybody here, if you're a student, please look at all sizes of schools. But I mean, I had to learn every single sport we had there, and got to work with some terrific people. I never dreamed I would work with wrestling. I didn't know anything about wrestling, but I go into that gym and learning how to score a wrestling match, and working every sport we had. I'd been involved with softball and volleyball and tennis and things like that in the past, but just being able to learn everything there, I think, was so valuable. Had I stayed there or come to Tennessee, I mean, it was, and the people I was around, that was number one. When I came back to Tennessee, and I mentioned the 97-98 year, they went undefeated. But the first game I think they played, or maybe the first regular season game, was against Louisiana Tech. I think there were around 14 or 15,000 people there at a women's basketball game. The roof was coming off that place. It was so loud. And I'm like, this is really cool to see this and to feel that energy. I think too, I mean, again, I'm just pulling things out of there because there's so many different things. The relationships from that baseball team I mentioned in '93 at Carson-Newman, certain teams here. I work for a couple national championship track and field teams here with J.J. Clark. Those building that program from where it was one of the lower programs in the SEC to where it ended up to win championships, and then being part of the Tennessee basketball program has been phenomenal. And then too, I think because of my age, I see a lot of these student athletes come in here as young people, and then to see them go on and be adults and parents and leaders in communities or get inducted into halls of fame and those sorts of things. It's really neat to see that whole spectrum. And that means I'm getting older, but it's really neat to see that as them being successful in life and being good role models and productive people in their communities.
You mentioned at the beginning the fact that the first Arkansas game that you covered felt like a little bit of a rodeo place where they had the trailers where teams were getting ready. And I think you have a unique perspective on how far women's athletics have come, and certainly the value of women's sports, because there are very few schools in the country that can tout the attendance that Tennessee has year in and year out. So with all of that in mind, how have you seen the growth and value of women's sports changed in your time in the chair of a media relations director?
Yeah, so I think, obviously we've talked about Coach Summitt, and she has been instrumental in growing women's basketball, but more than that, women's sports, just motivating people to see what this little country gal can do if she puts her mind to it. I mean, I don't mean to boil it down that small, but she came from a farm, and she's running a program. She's making a great salary. People know her everywhere. She has influence, but she stayed pretty humble for someone who attained those heights. But I think the big thing for her was just letting people know, if you put your mind to it, if you work hard, you can make things happen. And I think her accessibility to the media too was a big part of that. She let people come inside the program, letting HBO follow the team a whole year and see their ups and downs, to come into the training room when somebody tore their ACL. A little bit different times back then, but that kind of access gets people. It's like the NFL shows now, where you go into training camp with the team and you see, you get to see an inside look at something, and you feel a little closer to it, and maybe you want to be a fan. And I'm struck by that too. When Lady Vols travel, it doesn't matter where they go, there are going to be people wearing orange in the stands, and a lot of times there are more people wearing orange than there are the home team's colors. And I attribute a lot of that to her. And I think Vicky Kazee Hollifield there at Carson-Newman was someone I worked with. Gene Love was another one with tennis that really lifted their sports up and prepared their student athletes. And Vicky had that fire, and really respected how she was a lot like that Pat Summitt type of fiery leader, and made people realize they could do things. And I think our media coverage as a whole for women's basketball went from first championship I went to in '89 was in Tacoma, Washington, in the Tacoma Dome. And I think the men's championship that year was in the King Dome, where the Seahawks played at the time. I think that's what it was called. But anyway, so you had the suburb city, and then you had the big football stadium. And now they're playing in similar sized venues. The women's game is played in football stadiums now and large basketball arenas, similar to the men, and they'll sell them out, which is really cool to see. You go from 8,000 fans to 33,000 or whatever. And that happens because of exposure. TV exposure has been a big part of that too. Last
question for you. We talked about at the very beginning, off air, that you had done some media training with the current crop of Lady Vols. How do you grade your performance being in front of the camera for probably the first time in a long time?
Well, I try to let our players watch their own interviews after we conduct media training. So I'll wait to watch this. This is not where I usually am, but I'll watch it and I'll let you know how I feel about it afterwards and see how many times I said
Hey, probably less than me. It was great talking to you, Eric. Love all of the stories, and best of luck getting ready for this edition of the Lady Vols.
Michael, thank you so much. I appreciate you. You have a great year, and I hope to see you soon.
Thanks so much. That is Eric Trainer, more than 3 decades of experience in media relations, currently the media relations director for the University of Tennessee women's basketball team. This has been episode 23 of Mossy Creek Conversations. Thanks for watching and listening here on the Eagle Sports Network.